Hey girl! We're talking about making programming languages. So before the break and in the first half, we spoke about some things we'd like to see in the language, what the priorities are, and we've just actually kind of been talking, well, basically I've been waffling about things I think would be interesting to have in it as part of syntax. Now, I had a thought during the break, and I have many thoughts during the break, but the one that was most interesting to me was not to call these traits, because I think that starts to get confusing, right? If you use a language that has trait support, it's probably going to be confusing to see class-like things that have a single method where that's limited. I would far rather we call these shared functions. Now, what I was initially proposing was to have something like trait, and this is borrowing a lot from PHP syntax. So trait, method A, public function, method A. Oh, code formatting in a text editor. Something like this, right? Woohoo! See ya. Bye, gun. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Enjoy, learn, and go. Now, this is what I was initially imagining, inspired heavily by PHP syntax, because that's where I was first introduced to the idea of traits. And that may be kind of a boast, right? This is a new keyword to describe something which is basically a container for a single method, which mixes in this idea of public function, which is weird. And like there's duplication here, except like some strange case stuff going on. And we want to restrict this to a single method. No properties, nothing. I think it would be far better to have shared function method A. And then when you define a class, to say foo class, and I'm not sure exactly on the terminology here, but share public method A. I think that would be cool. I think that would be so cool. Don't you think? And you could have things here now, getting to things like overloading. I don't think I'm gonna get to all the arguments about overloading, because actually it's a super loaded topic. Pardon the pun. But mostly when you define methods in programming language I've had the pleasure of working with, you say prop1, oh, that's not good, over here, something like string, I'm not even gonna use dollar anymore, string prop1, int prop2, etc. Right? And what I imagine is that if you have this defined as a shared function, you would match the signature where you use this. The argument names can be different, that's fine. But maybe I want to enforce them that they're the same, I don't know. But I'd like to do this kind of thing, right? Forget for a second that I'm using delimiters, curly braces as delimiters, and that I'm using semicolons as terminators. Forget about that. Public shared function. But I think this would be a really cool way to define that. If I had a way to define traits that auto-loaded like this, or shared functions that auto-loaded like this. Basically, if I had a way to define function auto-loading, this would be amazing, right? I could do a class map, I could do a file list based on however I compile this stuff, and so I could theoretically have class auto-loading. I still haven't decided how to do namespaces yet in this language, but anyway, I could do something like this, which is a lot clearer than having a trait with a single method and duplicating names and having that extra terminology. Because normal functions could just be function method z, which has some stuff, right? On the other hand, functions I expect to be shared by traits could be like this. In fact, maybe I could even do like that. maybe I don't have to have shared function. Though, to be honest, if I use this within that, it's a bit of a problem. Is it really? How do we differentiate functions like this, which have access to this dot whatever? Do we say shared function? Owned function? Owned function? No, I think shared function is right. I think shared function is right. So if you have a function, you can't use this. This dot whatever, that doesn't break. That breaks. So $this for PHP, self for other languages, like CoffeeScript, I think. Or maybe this works in CoffeeScript, I can't remember. But if you say shared function, you can use this. And if you use this within the function that doesn't say shared function, it breaks. Do we do it like that? No. I think it's still good just to have function. Silversphere, no. No, I just sat here in silence and drank water. I think it would be good if we just have simple syntax for this. Going back to the very first point, beginners can pick this up easily. If we do just a simple function, you can define functions to be executed without this context. If you use this inside of a function and you try and call it outside of a class context, it should give an error. Using this outside of a class, whatever that error is. Whatever that error is. But then you should be able to import it like this, I think. So I imagine other functions would be something, other methods would be like public function method B, private function method C, yeah, I think that's cool. So this goes closer to PHP, right? Now in JavaScript you can't do public and private as part of a class definition. You have to use weird hacks and closing scope to be able to do that. But in PHP you can do this. So public function, private function. And I kind of want to require public, private to be defined for everything. Okay. So I want public and private to be required for everything that you define inside a class, but classes aren't actually required. You can just make programs just with functions. I need some water. But if you want to use a function in multiple classes, you can say public or private shared function method A. We don't need the concept of protected as exists in PHP because we don't have inheritance. So there is no subclass that's ever going to use a protected method. But we do want to be able to say this function, even though it's shared and presumably publicly accessible when it's just called as a function, when it's called in the context of a class, it can be public or private, but to show that it is well-formed. To show that it's well-formed and that it uses a shared class, we have this shared keyword. Public, shared, function, whatever. Now this leads me to another thing. Do I want to call these functions? Do I want to call these functions? That's basically what they are, right? But other languages like Ponylang call this fun, I think. Have you heard of Ponylang? Panny. Ponylang.org. Is that the domain? I'm sure it is. Here we go. Tutorial. Ponylang is actually pretty cool. I was looking at it the other day. It's pretty awesome. Classes, functions, fun. So oh, I have something flying around here. How arbitrary. Do we want to call function as like the full name of this thing? I think function kind of works for me. And the reason I think it works for me is that it's clear what it is. It's long-winded, to be sure, but it's clear what it is. Fun, funk, any kind of arrow syntax only, I think, is perhaps missing the point a bit. I don't know how I feel about that, but I like having the function keyword. So let's put that in the list of the never-ending list. Have function keyword. Sure. It's a very good, very well-formed list. Anyway, I think this looks okay for a class. Now, let me delete this stuff for a minute and talk about testing, because testing is a huge priority thing for us, right? Making it easy to pick up. We kind of have a little bit about that here, right? We don't have the trait keyword. We have implicit interfaces. So interface function method C. I mean, are we going to say we require public on here? Public function method C. Are we going to do that? Are we going to have private functions? I mean, the purpose of interfaces is for public contract, right? So implementation shouldn't matter with an interface, so we should always have public functions. Maybe we just enforce at the compiler level we always have public function here, and this mostly compiles to the PHP alternative. JavaScript doesn't have interfaces, so we're kind of screwed there and not sure what we're going to do to get to compile that if we want to compile to JavaScript. But anyway, we're not going to say foo class implements whatever it's called. But it will see, okay, I have, this is a private method. Actually, that's what we want. So this class has this public function method B with the same signature. And so when I say foo class instance of has method C, it's going to return true, even though I don't say implements has method C. It's going to go through this interface and say, okay, all these functions go through foo class. Does it have a function with that signature? Does it have a function with the next signature? Until it sees a difference and then says false, or at the end says, no, it does, and return true. And we can try and cache these things. Oh, sorry, Firesphere. Firesphere says that someone else took the username. Yeah. Sorry about that, man. Sorry about that. Twitch is a horrible place. It's not really horrible. There's lots of really cool people here. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm sinking lower and lower in my chair. Basically because I'm resting my feet on stuff under the table. Okay, back to testing. I'm so getting sidetracked. Back to testing. What about this language can help people write tests? Aha! I know what can help. So I was thinking about this earlier, and perhaps that was a little bit deceptive. I do actually know what can help people. So Firesphere says you shouldn't name them shared. A trait is a characteristic. A shared is not written in stone. I don't know what you mean. I agree. A trait is a characterization of behavior. It is characteristic of the classes that use it. I don't know whether you mean shared as taken from the language of taken from the dialect of another programming language is not written in stone. This is so in PHP, just to sidetrack again, you can have trait, foo, trait, public function something with some code, and then you can have class, foo class with the most imaginative names, use foo trait, something as private something else. I think that's the syntax you can use. I mean, I think that's valid, or pseudo syntax or whatever. So you can transform the scope of this and you can rename this, but it's essentially going to take this and allow you to mash it into your class, right? This changes that compiler assisted copy and paste. I mean, I like the syntax. FireSphere, explain to me what you mean, and I'll get to that when chat catches up to the stream. Okay, so back to testing. What I want to do is I want to have a new keyword, a new construct for this language to say test. Let me delete this interface for a little bit because it's getting confusing. But test function method A, using the same signature. Well, do we want to do that? Yes. We do want to do this. We do actually want to do this. Okay. So test function method A, and I want you to be able to define many of these in this language. And this looks confusing and it looks like it shouldn't be allowed, but it's for a very good reason. If we have function overloading, which is to say, if we have a function with the same name, different set and order of parameters and types, I really like languages that support function overloading, right? To be able to define these functions with slightly different signatures but the same name, so that you can use functions differently. And PHP gets around this by having dynamic functions, and JavaScript, I guess, in the same way. You can have dynamic functions, you can inspect the arguments, and then you can run different code underneath, right? So I want people to be able to define tests just by prefixing test to the name of the thing they're testing. So in a similar way that I have test function A with this, I want to have test class foo class. And in there, I want to have test function method B, test public function method B. As an example. This is getting super messy. I don't think so. I think this is fine actually. Test function method A, test public function method B. So it's essentially taking exactly the same syntax and prefixing test to the things it's testing, right? But I want people to be able to define multiple of these so that they can test this function in different ways. You don't have to bundle all your testing code for a unit that you're testing into a single test function. And you don't have to think of creative names for these things because you don't. Like, you can give the error message inside here if you really want to. Or you can just error with the line number, and then people must go and have a look what the error is at that line. The same with this. I want you to be able to define multiple tests with exactly the same signature. And this code must just convert in such a way that there aren't collisions. Because this way, if your method does something like, let's move this down here. Let's move this down. Let's look at this just in terms of functions. And you can extrapolate this concept for classes. What have I just done? You can extrapolate this concept for classes. But say I have method A here. And this says return prop1 plus prop2. If prop1 is string, whatever. Like, this is pseudocode, right? This is not, the specifics of this aren't important. But prop1 must be a string. Like, how this stuff works. I don't know, man. I don't know. This is kind of pseudocode. But say you have a function like this, which is a very simple, concise function. What do you want to do here? Well, maybe you want to say, maybe you want to have more keywords here. When prop1 equals 1. And then, yeah, when prop2 equals hello. Maybe this is the kind of thing that you want to do. And then you just, then new error. Maybe something like this. So this stays pretty much the same, but we have this new test keyword, and this associates the signature with a function that we're testing. And you can give some preconditions to say when, and that defines the context outside the function, that defines the properties that you pass in. And then what do we expect? Then what do we expect? Then is like saying this assert in like a PHP unit context. This assert new error. And we can make the assertion code say, okay, if what you're giving is an instance of the error things, then what you're actually saying is when you fire this method with all the preconditions, it should render this error. And if it doesn't, this test fails. You can say something like then new error or didn't throw an error. And so it's going to say, okay, this passed, or it's going to show the error message, didn't throw an error. That seems reasonable. So that's the one kind of test that you would say. But then what if you say when prop1 is hello, when prop2 is world, then hello world, or didn't combine. So Firesphere says, I can share a game with you, for example, that would mean any of my games, not specifically hello. For example, that's what I mean by written in stone. You can share a game with me, that would mean any game. So I think that's slightly a semantic argument, Firesphere, because I could call this shared function anything, right? The signature is distinct for the function. So in the case of an overloaded language, something like method A with a single property is distinct from method A with 2 properties, is distinct from method A with 3 properties. And if you share the exact signature of the overload, it's distinct. I think that's the difference. So you could share a game with me, and that's a whole type of thing that you're sharing, a whole categorization, a whole class of items that you're sharing with me. Alternatively, you could share Halo with me, and that's distinct enough. I don't think share is the problem there. I think the level of definition is the problem. But I understand what you're trying to say. I understand what you're trying to say. I just don't agree. Sorry. Okay. So we have some new keywords here. When is a new keyword. Then is a new keyword. Or is a new keyword, which has specific meaning in tests. Whereas if I shared a characteristic, like a game where you play as Lara Croft, the choice is limited to Tomb Raider games, thus you know what you're going to get, namely a trait. I don't think I'll think about it. I'll think about it some more. I don't think I've thought about it enough. What I have realized here is that this actually isn't specific enough, because I'm making inferences based on what I return from the function. I'm making inferences based on what I return from the function. This basically says all you are testing is that errors happen or that you get an exact return value. But maybe that's a good thing. If I shared Gran Turismo with you after you asked, share a game with Lara Croft, you'd be pissed off with the game not getting. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Firesphere, I see what you're saying. I need to think about it a bit more. Maybe shared is too broad. Maybe shared is too broad. Do you think the concept of sharing a method like this is good though? I'm interested, like the kind of association in signature and syntax here. Do you think that's a good idea, even if the name is perhaps not accurate? Anyway, back to these tests. Maybe this is sufficient. Maybe this is good, because this has an interesting side effect. This means whenever I define a function that has a set oh, I did something silly. See if you can spot what I did here. I have type hinting, but then I assumed that I could pass in a different value here. Okay, have a look back at this method, and let's change the signature back to be consistent. We have a method. It accepts prop1, which is a string. It accepts prop2, which is a string. If prop1 equals fails, throw a new error. Let's use throw. Throw a new error. Prop1 must not be fails. Prop1 must not be fails. Otherwise, return a concatenation of prop1 and prop2. Okay, so if prop1 is fails, then expect a new error, or say, do you want to say something like or say, or log, or report, or write, or print, or print? Okay, when prop1 is fails, when prop2 is hello, then new error or print didn't throw an error. I kind of like that syntax. So when prop1 is hello, when prop2 is world, say hello world with nothing in between, because that's what we're doing over here. Maybe we want to say just like this. So hello world or print didn't combine well. Didn't concatenate well, whatever. I think this is an interesting thing, because now we have ways to specify preconditions. This matches the exact function signature that we're testing. So we could have functions with different signatures and tests applicable to them. And what we say is we define preconditions, and we always return the same output with those preconditions. We make it idempotent. The side effect of saying then exactly the output or error with that is that we force these methods to always return the same output for the same input. What are instances where this wouldn't be true? What are methods in which this wouldn't actually be the case? My initial thought is random number generation. In that case, the output might be different for a suitably random thing, suitably random scheme of random number generation. The output might be random, and we'd want to match a type, not necessarily a value. Maybe we need to have defaults here. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have default values here, because that confuses what the default value actually means. If we have overloads that have default values, overloaded functions that have default values, and we have a different meaning for that here, that's confusing. I like this kind of notation for input parameters to this method. I like that, because that's very specific to one test per one logic path. But I don't like this so much. Maybe what I want to say is this assert, then this assert, result this assert equals result. This assert error thrown. I don't know what I want to do for the exact notation here. I basically want to say then, okay? Because we're doing if, when, then. In fact, we might even be able to change, well, I don't think I want to change these. I want to have when. I want to have when as the keyword, because basically I'm combining if and when. Is that really what I want to do? I mean, do I want to maybe just say if? If prop 1 equals fails, if prop 2 equals hello. I do actually want to say when. The way that you do test-driven development, or at least structure tests when you're doing test-driven development, is usually a three-part thing. You write a test and you say if some precondition, when some behavior or action or event, then some expected outcome. And that's where you pass or fail. What I'm doing here is I don't want to use the if keyword because, again, confusing with if elsewhere in the language, if I support the if statement. What I actually want to say is when prop 1 is something, when prop 2 is something, in place of if prop 1 and if prop 2. And the traditional when is running this function with those preconditions. When is only used here, in this case, to specify the values for those properties. So by the time I get to then, I can say, okay, all the preconditions must have been met, run this function with those preconditions, and give me the result. But how do I assign that? Because usually what you would have said in another language is if props is whatever, in fact you would say props is whatever. You wouldn't actually, you'd say props is whatever, result is thing, props, assert result is something. That's so if some precondition, when some behavior or event, then some expected result. What I'm saying is when these preconditions, by the time I get to then, something I can use. That something being the return of method A. So maybe if those preconditions, then this assert, I mean that assumes a subclass, right? Because I'm not going to define assert on any of these things. So assert equals result assert error class, and then something. Error not thrown. So error not thrown. Okay, so assert error, you want to have the result of this. So result as a special word, result as a keyword. Okay, if some preconditions, then it's going to run this method with the signature and the preconditions, and it's going to assign the value of that to a special keyword result. So you can say when prop 1, when prop 2, when prop 3, then assert error result, whatever, or then assert equals result. In fact, I'll put this down. I'll put this down here. Then, oh my gosh, indentation. Assert equals result hello world, strings not combined. That's interesting. Okay, so we introduce a test keyword, which prefixes classes. We can duplicate Twitch chat's very slow, sorry about that. We can duplicate the signatures of these, and they'll be combined in such a way that doesn't clash. But for each of them, we can say when we have some preconditions, and these we can be creative about, then, and here we can assert. Here we can make assertions. So we can say multiple assertions here. Can we? Does that actually make sense to do? Maybe what we should say is result is a special word here, and you can say result.assert error. So result becomes an object of whatever that is. It becomes an instance of a class that decorates the value that this function returns as a result and has methods on it. Assert equals, assert error, assert whatever. And so here you can say then result assert not equals, whatever. I mean, you still wouldn't have multiple assertions here because just the size that you're testing is so small. But this seems interesting. This seems kind of interesting. So we have a test keyword that we introduce. We have a when keyword to introduce preconditions. We have a then keyword to run the function with all the preconditions that have been defined. And we get a result object after this, which is an instance of like a result class that has some assertion values on it. And we can call these result is error, result is equal to, and we can give error messages as alternative properties for this, or we can just remove that and then somehow characterize that it is actually this function or this line that's thrown. I think that's interesting. I've gone way over time, to be honest, and this is kind of all that I want to do tonight because I think it's been fun. I think it's been fun thinking about these things, musing over some names of things, and what I actually want to do is have some example code. I want to draw up some example code of what I expect something like this to look like. Maybe I'll make an application that does something like prints a list of tasks out or renders an HTML page. I'll have classes which do those various things in pseudocode and tests which test that those various things work in pseudocode. And this will be a way to test out the syntax and the limitations that I've created. But I think we're off to a good start. And I'm keen to build something like this, or build a compiler for something like this. But that's kind of all I'm going to do tonight. Thank you very much for being here. It's been a very busy time and lots of chicken skill high. Lots of people joining in. Also chicken skill pie. Lots of people joining in, asking questions, making comments, which is awesome. Tomorrow I'm going back to the Spark Post API SDK proof of concept that I did yesterday because it worked very well and I was very happy about it. And Firesphere, who's actually in chat, asked me a little while ago on Twitter if I could talk a little bit about the direction and the structure of making an API or an API client. I'll clarify the requirements tomorrow because I actually work with Firesphere. I'll clarify the requirements, but I'm basically going to work on the Spark Post API tomorrow, which is a PHP API for a mail sending service. So join in for that. If you want to know when I go live for this stuff, follow me on Twitch and you'll get email notifications for when that happens. Other than that, I'm going to go. Thank you very much for being here. It's been awesome. Bye.